request, but we're going to go ahead and get started just because of time. And we will be recording this session, and you will get a copy of the recording and the slide deck and all the materials at the end of the presentation a little bit later this week. Okay? So if you're joining today, this is for the top 10 noticings from the 2023 SC College and Career Ready ELA standards, and this is specifically for grades 6 through 8. Okay, so we're going to move into some housekeeping. And that housekeeping is going to include some introductions. And so I'm going to start that with us. So my name is Tabitha Hughes, and I'm the middle level ELA Education Associate for the Department of, well, it's the CCR, College and Career Ready, but we are in the Office of Assessment and Standards on the standards side. And I have with me two of my colleagues today. I have Brenna McCormick. She is our secondary ELA Education Associate. And then I also have Casey Prince Harvey, who is kind of our jack of all trades. She is our humanities education associate, but she's also ELA support because she was a fabulous high school teacher. And so she comes in and supports us all in all the things. So while we're looking at the landing page and the attendance, which KPH is going to drop the link in for you, we would love for you to introduce yourselves to us. So just in the chat, drop your name and your district and your role so we can see who's joining us today for our webinar. And then, of course, as I said, KPH is going to drop in a link to the landing page, which will have all of our resources linked for your use after this. And then, of course, the attendance link, which is what we use to help keep track of who's attending and the impact we're having across the state. Okay, so we've got some Union County and Abbeville. Hello, welcome. Georgetown, got some coaches. If you see me looking off to the side, that's because I have two monitors and I'm looking between both. So, oh, hey, Sarah, we got some SCDE people with us today. Berkeley County, Spartanburg 1. Very good. Well, welcome to everybody. We're excited to have you here. So we're going to jump right on in. So we're going to look at today the next slide, which kind of talks about our purpose. So Brenna, if you want to advance us to the next slide. Okay, before we go to the well, that's fine. Can anybody tell me why do we think we have that image there? If you know what it is, you can unmute, put in the chat what it is, but what do we think? What do you notice?
Yeah. So we got a female.
So why this picture? Yes, many pillars of support. Thank you, Debbie. So this is basically our role and our purpose here at the State Department. We want to equip teachers with the essential knowledge of important shifts, clarifications, and additions in our new ELA standards so that we can ensure effective implementation and alignment in classroom instruction. So for a little history lesson, this is at the Parthenon in Greece. These are called caryatids, and they are basically support columns. And that's what you would see or would have seen holding up parts of the temple. Okay. All right. So that is our purpose. So we're going to now move on and look at this quote. Again, keeping with that theme, this is Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Think about that for a second, and then tell me, what do you think? What is the connection between this quote and this work we're going to do today with our top 10 noticings and our standards for 6 through 8? Okay, feel free to unmute or drop in the chat.
I was just going to say, Tabitha, from my experience, every PD or ELA webinar that I join in, I learn more and more. So I know I'm not going to learn everything in this one, but the more that I regularly attend what y'all are providing, the better off I'm going to be. So I feel like that's probably the case for everybody here. More often that we're there, the better we are.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else? So I want you to think about this as we go forward into the rest of the presentation. When we think about what we are repeatedly doing, if teachers repeatedly do what they've always done without upfitting our instruction around these new standards, is anything really going to change? So be thinking about that as we go forward. Okay, so today, of course, we're looking at 10 things every 6 through 8 teachers should notice in our new standards. And we're going to be going over the following standards as we go through this presentation. Notice it is a lot. 6 through 8 has some pretty significant shifts. If you have already joined us for some of our others, you have seen the shifts for our K through 2 and then 3 through 5, and now we're building upon that. All right, so if you look at our next slide, we're going to talk about the agenda, and this is kind of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about foundations of literacy very briefly. We'll do applications of reading, research, communications, and some clarity and closure. So we're going to move straight into our foundations of literacy, and I just want to give you a very quick look at this. This is a new strand. It has 4 standards and 23 indicators. It is primarily designed for K through 2 students. And it discusses those foundational literacy skills. So if you're here, you might think, but I teach middle school. How does this apply to me? Okay, well, there are some tools listed on the landing page that can help you learn more about ways to support your striving readers at a middle level. In a perfect world, all of our students would be on grade level. They would come to us ready, but we know that this is not a perfect world. And so for middle school teachers, we're going to need some tools to help us go back possibly and scaffold some of our students. And so on the landing page, you're going to see some resources that you can take some time to dig into a little later. We're also at the agency working on a document that can help our secondary teachers to have a little bit more direction and guidance in using those foundational skills to help catch up their middle school students. Okay, so that was a very quick, as I said, overview of foundations of literacy, because that's not really where we live in the middle school world. So we're going to move on to our applications of reading, because this is a huge bulk of our session. So the applications of reading, a quick look, it is comprised of 10 standards and 14 indicators. It applies to all students. And it's the developmental literacy skills. It's progressive. It's built on what is developmentally appropriate. You see that vertical alignment of skills and the progression as we move forward. So we're going to dive in first to AOR 3.1. This particular standard and indicator deals with author's choice of point of view or perspective, and how that shapes style and meaning within and across literary text for this particular standard. So I want us to look at the chart on our screen at this moment. And notice I included 5th grade in this. Looking at 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and the verbiage that is highlighted in red, okay, what do we notice about point of view and perspective? Do we see anything that really stands out to us, especially as middle school? Yes, the slide deck will be shared, absolutely. Okay, I got some wait time going on. All right, each year is a little deeper. Yes, absolutely. And what do we notice about what the tasks have to do? What do kids have to do as they're going deeper? Yes, so they must explain. Okay, notice in 5th grade, they're explaining how the point of view from which a story is narrated influences how events are described. The verbs do change. Okay, so notice with each time, yes, they're explaining, but then they're moving up to determining and explaining the impact of multiple narrators or shifts, Again, moving up to 7th grade, they're going to talk about unreliable narrators. So very interesting how the rigor goes. Now, I'm very curious, deeper analysis, absolutely. I'm very curious, how do, and I would love everybody, or if you'd like to put this in the chat, how do you define point of view versus perspective? Because this is one we often see a little interesting responses for throughout in the field. So how do you, when you're teaching or coaching, explain these? And you feel free to unmute. Okay, perspective involves inner thoughts. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, meaning it's different to each person. Okay, point of view, we think about first person, third person. Yes. Okay. All right. So let's look at our glossary definitions. Oh, I like that. POV is how the narrator tells the story. So one of the tools that we have, and I know most of you may at this point have seen or are familiar with our glossary, but let's look at the definitions that the South Carolina glossary gives us for perspective and point of view. So Brenna, if you want to start with our click-ins. So perspective in a literary text is how the narrator and or characters perceive, very good, perception, events in a story. Now in informational text and speeches, that is a little bit, the perspective is an author or speaker's unique attitude toward a topic or perception of an issue or event. Okay. Point of view then becomes the type of narrator used to tell the story. Typically, we do usually see first person and third person. Okay, even though third person goes a little bit in depth with the different kinds of third person in terms of unreliable, so forth. And then some authors write stories using more than one point of view. So it is important when we talk about our glossary in South Carolina that we are instructing using these specific definitions, because this is how South Carolina defines a perspective and point of view. And when we instruct, we want to be cognizant and true to the language of the glossary and of our indicators. Okay, so that takes us up to our next activity. Okay, we have a little video. We're going to do some instructional practice. And so, Brenna, will you click that first time? Okay, so we're going to watch a little clip. Hope you got some Avengers fans in here. How would you describe the point of view in the following clip? How does the point of view influence our own perception of the events and the characters? Because as we watch this video, the observer, we the observer, or whoever's watching, we're the observers unknown to this event. Okay, it's a third, so we're going to go through and see how it shapes our perception. All right, Brenna?
Striker had control of his mind. Move. It wasn't him.
Left boot jet failing. Flight systems compromised.
He's not gonna stop. Go.
Targeting systems knackered, boss.
Am I balling it? I don't know.
Okay, so if we're looking at this video, okay, and you were doing this with your students, first of all, how would you describe the point of view in the following clip? So, anybody want to take a gander? And remembering film is a little different than books. Okay, it's definitely third person. Okay. The observer in this case is detached from any specific character that we're seeing as the events unfold. So the camera is, yes, third person objective. The camera is an impartial observer. So it's an external viewpoint. Now, if we did this with students, then Brent, if you want to click in, we've got Captain America, we've got Iron Man, and we've got Bucky. So when we look at the perspective, one of the questions that we could ask students is to choose a character and describe his perspective, either Captain America's or Iron Man's or Bucky's perspective around the events unfolding in the clip. Each character would possibly have a different perspective, okay, on what they see happening or in this particular moment. Okay, Brenna, there you go. All right. If you were going to do this assignment, who would you choose to write about? Whose perspective would you give?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hey, there's a lot going on in that scene.
Yes.
You could choose either character, but also to be awareness of the background knowledge of the plot, the events, everything that kind of goes together
Mm-hmm.
to influence our perception of what's been going on. Would be also very important, especially with this a complex text. Even though it's a film, it's a
Yes.
complex text.
That's right. And remember, one of the things that our students have to do is they have to be able to interpret different multimedia presentations. So, and most of our kids are probably aware of the Marvel Universe and DC and so forth. So they know these characters, and they would many of them may have a vested interest. Okay, so moving on to our next instructional standard, it's AOR 4.1. And again, still looking at author's perspective and purpose, but this is going to be how it shapes style and meaning within and across informational texts. So before we were looking at literary, now we're looking at informational text. And so again, we've included fifth grade because we see that shift. In fifth grade, they're comparing and contrasting a primary account and a secondary account of the same event. Okay. They also are identifying how the different perspectives impact the content. But we move from comparison and contrast to the sixth grade. They begin, analyzing those accounts, that primary and that secondary account of the same event, and then how that impact how those perspectives impact the content and the style. So again, we see the rigor and we see how it progresses. Okay, now there might be some questions, and we had some questions in the field before, because when you get to seventh grade, we see the verb determine, and it looks as though we're stepping back in complexity, but really we're not. Whereas we have fifth grade, they've been introduced to a skill, and now in sixth grade, they're applying that. Same thing with seventh grade. They're determining now an author's perspective or purpose, and they're going to practice that whole year. And then in the eighth grade, after they now know how to determine, they will begin analyzing an author's perspective and purpose in a text. Okay. So next, we're going to have an example. Now, this is a primary account and a secondary account of the same event. This happens to be social studies, and it's on the Trail of Tears. So I'm going to just very quickly let you just kind of skim these. The primary account on the left, secondary account on the right. And then we'll show you a couple of questions that could work with students as they're working with comparison, contrast, analysis, determining point of view and perspective, and author's purpose. Hey, Brenda, you want to click in our questions? All right. So looking at these two accounts, first off, we would want to know, how are the two accounts of the same event similar, and how do they differ if they do? Okay. So how do the different perspectives impact the content and the style of the text? So let me ask you this. Out of these two accounts, which one pulls to you the most? Which one, I don't say appeals to you the most, but which one maybe grabs your attention the most? You can unmute or drop in the chat. Okay, the primary. Why? Why the primary account? Why does that speak so much? There's emotion there, absolutely. Especially that last sentence. Let the historian of a future day tell the sad story with its sights, its tears, the groan. Very good. So we see a secondary account is more just fact-based. It's just kind of like, yeah, they didn't expect this to happen, and here's who were involved. So students can then say, okay, it's the emotions of the primary source that really impact how this style and how this author chose to write this. Incidentally, this is from a soldier's account. He was on the chair, issue of bias or lack of bias. Very good. He was a U.S. soldier who actually accompanied the Cherokees on the Trail of Tears. He was friends of the Cherokees, and his family asked for years and years for him to explain, or tell the story, and he would not. And he told them on his 80th birthday, he would tell them what happened. And that's what he did. That was he recounted the story on his 80th birthday. And so that's how we have that primary account. Okay, so let's now look at a 2-word check-in. So we've had a lot in those 2 indicators. Choose 2 words to describe your feelings about AOR 3.1 and 4.1 and explain your choices. I would love to have 2 people unmute. You can still put it in the chat, but 2 people to unmute and just give us your words and why you're feeling that way. Oh, Ruth, you have a question? Yeah,
Well, I didn't want to step on, sometimes you go to hit the talk
Yeah.
and then somebody else says it at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that I feel optimistic and maybe hopeful, because I think that I'm already in my mind thinking of what I'm going to do with these 2 standards. I love what you did with it, with being able to see the side by side. I think this is very clear and easy to understand, whereas I think sometimes when it comes to ELA standards, sometimes they seem sometimes not always as clear as like a math standard, for example.
Right.
But I think this is very clear, and I think it's easy to see what we're supposed to do with these. And I think that just the depth of knowledge that the kids are going to get just from these 2 standards alone, I think are just going to be awesome. So I'm actually excited about it.
Well, yeah.
I didn't say excited, so I just kind of maybe ecstatic. I say ecstatic. So
Absolutely great. Wonderful. I'm seeing confident, inspired. Could one more person unmute and tell us what they're thinking? Powerful, anxious. Yeah, Debbie, I could see where some anxiety is there.
Oh, I could go ahead and share my reasoning for confident and inspired. So confident, I knew we had the glossary as a resource to, browse through, and these definitions have been there, but the examples, just absolutely help put those into practice. And then inspired, similarly to Ruth, I'm kind of looking at this like, well, how can I bring this back to my teachers?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And I love all of your responses, because this is, it is great that this has more clarity. And there's no room for that kind of confusion. We've heard, some people use them interchangeably, perspective and point of view, and clearly they're not interchangeable words. And so this is going to help clarify, that confusion. Okay, so let's move on and look at our next AOR standard. And this is, of course, with argument and rhetoric. Now, again, this is a very big, huge shift for our middle schools, because now in 6th grade, rhetoric is introduced. So we're, again, moving from 5th grade, where they just determine an author's argument and trace its development. Now they have to trace the development of an author's argument while identifying the types of reasoning used and or rhetorical appeal. Okay, so we're bringing rhetoric down lower, okay, than high school, because students need to begin to recognize rhetorical appeal and those kinds of things, because they're inundated with it every single day. We know that, in commercials or social media, because if it's on TikTok, it's got to be true, right? So we have to, begin to teach our students to see a difference in that. Again, I want to draw your attention to our glossary definition of analyze, because that's one of those words that often, I might have my own definition, my teacher down the hall might have a definition, the coach might have a definition, but according to South Carolina, This is our definition for teaching analysis and to analyze, and it's to explore a text critically, and considering these key and literary elements and so forth. So having that common understanding creates a common platform for our students to have a common understanding across the state. Now, I want you to look at this question that Brenna's fixing to click in, because this is very important. How does the phrase trace the development of potentially impact student understanding of these indicators? Now, nod your head, raise your hand, whatever. If you've ever found trace the development of difficult to teach. Anybody have trouble with that? I know, I'll admit I did when I was doing it. It's, yeah. Okay, Monica, go ahead. Or were you just raising your hand to say, hey, it's difficult to teach?
I was just raising my hand to say it's difficult.
Yes, it is, because in this context, trace is not used in a way that most children are familiar with. They're, tracing, they want to trace something. But in this way, we're tracing with our thoughts. And so when we look at this phrase, we've got to be conscious of how are we going to show students what that means to trace something mentally in our minds as something develops. Okay, so let's look at our strategy for this. So let's go to the next slide. And this one's very short, but it's going to melt your little heart. This is a trace the development timeline activity. So Brenna, if you want to play the video.
Hi, Maddie.
When was this building?
It's old, but it has big windows and lots of light. I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Are you breaking up with me?
Slow and steady.
Trans, the official sudden vantage spectacles. Maddie.
All right, anybody ready to go out and buy a Chevrolet? Okay, so let's look at this timeline activity. Now, this might be a simple way to help students to see that you can trace the development of this particular, not but another dog, yes, absolutely. That they can trace the development of how something, like, for example, how we were looking at, argument or rhetoric. How does that develop? So Brenda, if you want to click in. Now, of course, this commercial is going backwards. So we see the doggy as a senior, then he's kind of mature, he's a late adult, and then he's an early adult. And I say a teenage, if you got animals, that they definitely have some teenage times in them. And then puppy. So they get this, even though this is backwards, they get to see the development of this argument or for this commercial. So we're going to click on our question. So a student will be able to answer, what is the product being sold in this commercial? Well, it's the Chevy car. And so then we can identify the rhetorical appeal being used. So from ethos, pathos, logos, what would we be looking at? Okay. Yeah. Okay, yes. So we're looking at pathos, that emotional appeal. I wanted to go get another pooch when I saw this immediately, not a new car, but I did want another pooch. Okay, and so how does the timeline trace the development of the commercial's argument? Well, it's tugging on our heartstrings because we're seeing that this car is going to last through the journey, just like this animal has lasted and gone through this journey with this little girl. So we see this activity and it becomes concrete for students to be able to trace that development. Okay, so moving on, we're going to now move into AOR 6.1, and this is the summarizing standard. And so we look at summarizing and paraphrasing text to support comprehension and understanding. Again, I included 5th grade so that we can see the jump as we go into middle school. So in 5th grade, they're summarizing a text to enhance comprehension, but they're really specifically looking at plot, theme, relevant key details for a literary text, and they're including a central idea, relevant supporting details. So from there to 6th, 7th, and 8th, it looks like it's the same, just summarizing and paraphrasing content from grade level text, but there would be a nuanced difference. In this particular case, it's going to, again, go with the rigor, the text complexity, the types of materials that they're going to be working with, either in media, any different kinds of media forms or text, are going to be more rigorous and more complex, which then is going to make them have to reach deeper and further as they come up with summarizations and paraphrase. Okay, so Brenna, you want to click in? So summarization leads to analysis. We're building up to that point where we can analyze what's important. And it should be used as a strategy to enhance the comprehension of a text. Okay, so let's look at an instructional strategy around this particular standard. It's called the first word summary strategy. And so what is it? Well, it's a variation on traditional acronyms. It is the process of analyzing words and creating related sentences or mini summaries. It allows students to gain a deeper understanding of the topic. So what does it look like? Okay, it's going to mimic an acrostic poem format. It's going to be related to a specific topic, object, or key concept. And it allows students to summarize important information related to the topic without feeling overwhelmed, because we know that even in middle school, kids sometimes they struggle with creating a good, concise, clear summary. Okay, so let's look at an example, okay, of that. So we have the solar system. Now, again, in an acrostic poem, it would all, kind of flow. Like if you had your name, it would describe certain things about your name. Okay, this one is helping students to come up with specific small little summary pieces. So if you look at the solar system, we can see that they start with S. Well, the sun is the center of the solar system very quickly. So they're going through and they're creating mini summaries out of a specific concept, in this case, solar system, that could be used in their science content. Okay, so click in, Brenna, and let's look at this question. Why might this type of summary strategy appeal to middle level students? What do you think?
It can help to organize their thoughts.
Yes. Yes, organize their thoughts. It's not overwhelming or intimidating. They could work with a partner. Okay, helps direct their thinking. They're chunking it. Yes, and middle school, well, all students, even adults, sometimes we need to chunk things. We need to break it down so that we can gain some clarity. And so this takes the intimidation out of writing a summary, because now we don't have to think, okay, do I have all the pieces? This is just helping me organize my thoughts, direct my thinking, work with a partner, and get the essential information that I need without stressing if it's in a paragraph format or so forth. Okay, so let's now look at AOR 8.1. We're analyzing word relationships and nuances and word meanings within literary and informational texts. So we are again looking at interpretation of authors' use of figurative, connotative, technical language in literary, informational, and multimedia texts. Okay, and so we do see our verbs underlined, again, thinking of a vertical progression What kind of words are students going to see as they progress through the middle school grade levels? What kind of content language? What kind of figurative language? What kind of technical language will they be seeing as they progress and texts become more complex and in depth? So I also included in here K through 2. Their focus is really on word relationships, descriptive words and phrases, and nuances of meaning. And then that moves them into 3 through 5, which kind of begins to focus on literal and non-literal meanings of words, recognizing and explaining the meaning of figurative language. Okay, but now look at how we're shifting. We're now interpreting. So we can't just live in that identification place. Okay, so now we look at figurative language. What is it? Well, it's language that helps readers interpret a writer's meaning and allows a writer to articulate more abstract and complex concepts. Okay, figurative language contains figures of speech. So now let's look at our glossary definition of figures of speech. Okay, that's a word or phrase used in a non-literal way in order to have a specific effect. Okay, we see them in reading, we see them in writing, we hear them in oral communication. So they're the techniques that authors use in figurative language. And students have to move beyond just being able to say, oh yeah, that's a simile because it uses like or as, or that's a metaphor, to really understanding why would an author choose to use that kind of language to convey his or her message. So let's look at instructional practice for 8.1 in practice. So this is a very simple poem. If you're a middle school teacher, you know, well, the poem itself was written long before the book, but this is used in a typical classic middle level text, The Outsiders. And so it's nature's gold. It's nothing gold can stay, but it's talking about, and if you've read the book Outsiders or taught the book, the universal theme of the fact that innocence doesn't stay. Our lives move on, and that innocence that we have as a child goes away as we move into adulthood. So if I were going to do this activity with my students, I would be thinking about how could this poem be used to build students' critical thinking skills around figurative language and author's craft. Building critical thinking skills is one of our overarching expectations because it's just good practice that we use in our ELA classrooms and our other classrooms, because it's not like we don't critically think in social studies or science or math. So how could this poem, if we're looking at this very simple, 8-line poem, how could we use this to really hone in on figurative language and figures of speech to help our students dig deeper into meaning? If I could have one person unmute, that would be great. Please feel free to drop in the chat though.
Can you repeat the question,
But
please?
yeah, Brenda, will you click in?
I'm sorry,
Brenda?
I had a student come in.
Oh, no, that's okay. How could this poem be used to build students' critical thinking skills around figurative language and author's craft?
Tabitha, I think when the students start questioning about illusion and the metaphors, and they're having to think about the choices that the poet made, then it's going to help them with the meaning or getting to the theme of the piece.
Absolutely. And this is one of those that's perfect for like using closed reading with, because this is not a poem you would want to be one and done with. Students you would want to dig in with this and really, get that surface level, what they think it means first, and then start really breaking down some of this language and what does it mean and the metaphors for Eden and so forth. So again, it will help them build into thinking more critically. Yes, interpretations and using the line as evidence to support. Perfect. Okay, so now let's move into our next AOR indicator. This is 10.1, and this is, of course, evaluating and critiquing multimedia presentations of a text or a subject, and then thinking about how does that impact an audience. Okay, one thing that we want to draw and make note of is that this is a new indicator for 7th and 8th grade, okay, in the 2023 standards. And in 6th grade, it's shifted from compare and contrast in the 2015 standards. So students are really expected to work with different kinds of multimedia presentations, and really begin to look at how do multimedia presentations, how do these things impact an audience, thinking about whether we use film or whether we use a play or whether we use a text. Okay, so Brenda, you want to click in for me? Okay, and then the last one, how significant is the shift in language in the 6th grade indicator and the addition of the 7th and 8th grade indicators? And then what can be inferred instructionally? Okay, so just be thinking about those things as you're thinking about it. I have one more. So this is a great example of this particular standard. So Brenda, you want to go to the next one? All right, so we have two different multimedia presentations, but it's about the same general event. This is about Alexander Hamilton's, I don't want to say assassination, but it was his duel with Aaron Burr. And so on the left, we have a portion of the letter that Aaron Burr sent to, Gretchen must love Hamilton. If you haven't seen it, you got to see it. It's fabulous. But this is a portion of the letter that Aaron Burr sent to Alexander Hamilton, outlining his, problems and how he felt like he had been egregiously, Gretchen, the character, yeah, harmed by Hamilton. And then this particular multimedia presentation is basically the 10 dual commandments. And so it basically talks about, and for time, we're going to skip showing it just for time, but this song, go back and watch it, you'll get this presentation, talks about the top 10 steps to have a duel. And so then you could have students compare, what was the tone? How did it impact the audience to see it on stage and hear it sung about versus reading the original letter? Okay, so next slide. We have lots of resources for your use when you're looking at. We have a 2023 to 2015 standards crosswalk. We have a glossary, we have rhetoric support documents, we have a text complexity document, we have vertical articulation with indicator insights, and a vocabulary support document. All of these documents would be very useful and helpful to help support AOR. Okay, so let's look at tying our thoughts together. Think of one takeaway from our work with the AOR strand today. What is one inference that can be made about the AOR strand? And then evaluate your comfort level or further needs with the AOR strand. We don't have to say it or write it, but just be thinking about tying those thoughts together with this particular strand of our new standards. Takeaways, inferences, and what you need as a teacher and or coach or administrator as you think about bringing this back to your school. Okay, so that brings us up to our part of our agenda. Now we're going to move into research very quickly. Okay, research, a quick look. 1 standard, 5 indicators. Instruction of research 1.2 begins in 2nd grade. Research 3.335 begins in 4th grade. Inquiry leads to the research process. Vertical articulation shows the development of the research process. So what is appropriate K through 2 versus what is appropriate 6 through 12. And then the research process is based on developmental readiness. So we have R.1, investigating and refining knowledge. Okay, so what this does this standard? It denotes a shift from general inquiry to more specific research expectations. Students are expected to conduct short and more sustained research tasks. They're expected to consult a variety of sources, but there is no requirement to use all the sources consulted, nor is there a specific citation style guide. And then there's no specific requirement. This ought to make everybody go, yay! There's no specific requirement to produce a 5-paragraph essay at the end. Okay, research is research, and how a student chooses to produce their work and show their work is really up to them and to the teacher. It doesn't have to be that traditional 5-paragraph essay. All right, so here's basically when we're looking at R.1.1. Again, this is about conducting short research. And again, we see how it shifts from 5th grade, where they're just generating questions about a topic. They're consulting a variety of print and multimedia sources, to then moving up to with more specificity in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade about the kinds of questions they're generating and the kind of sources they're using, and relevance. Are the sources relevant to the topic, relevant to the purpose? And so relevance becomes very important. So we noticed about the shift in these research expectations. The major shifts involve the types of questions and the relevance and the sources that they are using. So our instructional strategy is a critical thinking strategy about formulating questions. So what is it? It's a method used to inspire curiosity in students, prompting them to ask more questions. And it starts with a picture to engage students to create questions of wonder. So if we look at our example, this is a middle school social studies example on world civilizations. So you have the funerary mass of King Tut, and then you have one of the carvings from Samaria. So this would go with ELA R.1.1. They could generate questions about this. They can use a variety of print or media. They're going to make some inferences. That's an overarching expectation. And they're going to go with the social studies CO, comparing the development of social systems among the early River Valley civilizations. So to use this strategy, we would put the pictures up and just have the kids start asking questions. Okay, yes, oh yes, it is wonderful. Okay, so then going to some worth noting items about research. Natural curiosity sparks inquiry. Inquiry leads to the research process. Research is a process with explicit steps, and the research indicators are developmentally appropriate. We do have a resource for this. It is the research support document. And think about going further. How can you use the new research indicators to impact classroom instruction? And are there opportunities to collaborate with content areas? Okay, so let's move now into communications. Communications, a quick look, 9 standards, 9 indicators. Handwriting standard is K-5. Grammar and conventions, the matrix indicates where skills are introduced, not where instruction stops. And knowing that once the skill is introduced, it can be assessed. This standard also looks at writing instruction in the various modes and the writing process, knowing that they are paramount, and then using mentor text to marry reading, writing, and grammar and convention instruction. So then we look at modes of writing. We have argumentative, informative, expository, and narrative. There's some shifts in expectations. There's a focus on the structure and the format and the style. There's knowledge of reading skills that students are going to exhibit in the specific modes of writing. And then there's language of indicators that denote both developmental and appropriateness and progression of rigor. Okay, so if we look at this slide, what's the biggest inference you think can be made about our new standards and writing instruction? What's the big inference, the big takeaway from this? What are the standards really hitting? Or here's a better question, maybe. What is it moving away from? What is writing moving away from with our new standards? Yes, no TDA only. So now our new standards are actually focusing on kids learning how to write, the writing process, and learning how to be involved with that. It's not just about coming to a TDA response. Okay, so let's look at our next slide, argumentative writing, 8th grade. Some pretty major things. They're going to be acknowledging and refuting a counterclaim, establishing and maintaining a tone. 7th, supporting a claim using statistics, acknowledging a counterclaim. 6th grade, they're using clear reasons and relevant evidence and acknowledging an alternative perspective. So again, we're seeing how it's building as they go through this process of learning about argumentative writing. Okay, transition strategy. These are just using transition words as a strategy to help students improve on their writing. There are different categories of transition words. So we have time and sequence words, illustration words, emphasis words, change of direction, and conclusion words. And all of these can formulate a strategy to help students when they are developing arguments or they are identifying arguments or counterclaims or different perspectives. And so when we think about, it's easy to say use transition words, but students need to understand what kind of transition words are going to help them specifically when looking at argumentative writing. Yes, I do too. Okay, so here's just an example. On the next slide, I provided you an example of what that could look like. Again, you'll get this slideshow, so we're not going to spend a lot of time reading it, but you can see that I've underlined some different categories of transitional words that were used in the specific example about Abraham Lincoln and argumentative writing. Okay, so next we go to the next one is informative writing or expository writing. Again, 8th grade, analyze information from multiple sources, use varied transitions, which we just talked about. 7th grade, use text structures such as definition, comparing and contrasting, cause and effect as an organizational way to for their writing, establishing tone. And then in 6th grade, they're developing the topic with relevant examples and appropriate transitions to connect concepts. So the instructional strategy for this is a sentence frame. What is it? It is a powerful strategy that seems simplistic, but requires analytical thinking. And it's a conjunction strategy that takes a simple, low complexity sentence and expands it to include greater detail. So here's an example of how that could look. Middle school science examples from molecules to organisms. All living things are made up of cells because cells are the smallest unit that can be said to be alive. All living things are made up of cells, but some organisms are unicellular. All living things are made up of cells, so within cells, special structures are responsible. And then we can see how those tie together. It hits our C.2, writing informative and expository text. Again, making inferences, overarching expectation, and there's our science standard that goes along with this strategy. Okay, so reminds me of somebody wanted to, yes. So here's a micro writing experience, 10 minutes or less, just to get students writing. And all we did was pull those sentences and put them into a paragraph. Okay, now, of course, with that paragraph, we might want to then help students come together and make a specific revision or grammar or some conventions, because we wouldn't want every sentence to start with all living things are, but it does help them practice writing and tie those ideas together. Okay, last is instructional practice on narrative writing. Okay, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Noticing the different things that are going to be talked about in each of the grades, figurative language in 6th grade, point of view, time shifts in 7th, and then 8th is just more progressive and difficult writing. Okay, but we do notice about plot development, that it doesn't just stay in the identification of those terms. So types of conflict in developmental writing: person versus man, person versus nature, person versus self, person versus society. And then here's your strategy. It is a map the plot strategy. So you create a conflict, you progress the conflict, you conclude the conflict. Again, for a middle school student, this is manageable rather than just saying, how does the plot develop? Trace the development. They can very clearly see that when they begin to write, here's a plan for that, how they can create, progress, and conclude. All right, the last little part that we move into very quickly is just on grammar and conventions. Again, these are just some major concepts from grammar and conventions for 6th and 7th grade, and where things are introduced. If you look at the next slide, there is a grammar and convention matrix. I'm sure most of you have seen it, where things are introduced by grade level. And these are just some kind of examples of things that middle school students might enjoy doing, having them correct some social media grammar or some text message grammar. I love a good ellipsis too. Or edit some celebrity grammar and have them work on partners and have them do those things. Yes, can use this as a development of a mentor text. Absolutely. Okay, so our next slide basically talks about evaluating ideas. That's C9.1, very heavily into thinking about, this was revised for developmental appropriateness, vertical articulation, again, increases in rigor, and its intent is for active listening in order to critically evaluate, especially in things that are presented orally. That's where our TikTok and our Instagram comes in. Okay, overarching expectations are clearly captured in this particular standard. Okay, again, looking at digital media, audio, video, live presentations, how students in the individual grades are expected to look at these types of presentations and so forth and what they're looking for. And then the strategy for that would be progressive inquiry or research workshop. But anything that allows students to structure their learning experiences in a sequential manner, and increase in complexity and depth. It allows for a deeper understanding. So anytime a student can get in and you can create and structure something that they can go in and explore themselves, it is going to lead to deeper processing and deeper thinking. Okay. And then next we move into evaluating ideas, progressive inquiry, and how that could look as it progresses. So the last of this is a pause and ponder, just something for you to think about as you go through. Think about research and communication, what's captured your attention. How will you use it to tweak or change instructional practice in your building and whatever your role is? And can you take it back to someone in your school? And so we're going to, for clarity and closure, just very quickly think about plaque, plate, and priority. What's on your plaque? What have you accomplished or learned? What's still on your plate? What's your next steps? And what is your priority? What's the first thing you're going to do and why? And so that brings us up to our feedback. So you know that we always do feedback because it helps us gather and how we can tweak and make things better. So if you would either use the QR code or the link that's going to be dropped in the chat to complete the feedback, we would be most appreciative. And we're just going to listen and linger. Thank you. We went about 3 minutes over, but thank you so much for staying and hanging on with us. And we will be happy to stay and listen and linger. If you have any questions or just, want to chat, but we hope that you feel like you learned something today that you can take back. Oh, thank you, Mary. And that you can use and really begin to think about as we end this school year and move into our full implementation year. So thank y'all all for coming on this Monday. Oh, yay, yay. I do too, Mary. I think this is going to be so just monumental for the field and so helpful for our students and teachers. You're welcome, Tamika. Will the top 10 shifts be repeated over well, we have the recordings of them. Our summer lineup is already kind of pretty much created and developed, but that is something we may possibly could think of maybe expanding or something in the fall. Oh, great, Debbie. We're so glad to see that and know that. So do we have any other questions or anything? We don't want to keep you any longer. We know our time is valuable and precious, but we certainly are so thankful that you joined us today. You're welcome, Amy.
Tabitha.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, thank y'all again for such a wonderful session. Do you have any starting spots?
Starting spots for what in particular?
For
There's so
PD, everything is so interconnected, and I'm kind of worried about vertical alignment.
Right.
Piece, and the best bang for the buck, what would be some of the things I would need to hit first? If I plan on this, develop it for the district, where would
So have you, so my question is, have you done, I know that you've been to the trainings, has anything been rolled out to the teachers at this point from?
Yes.
Okay.
We've done some of the stuff I've got from the fall, and did last few in January.
Okay.
And I'm sending reading coaches everything now. So trying to plan for the fall. We want to do district-wide professional development. Things are so interconnected. Like, rhetoric's a big piece. We know that's a big change. But that's in a lot of little different, it's in different standards also in some regards. It impacts multiple things. The point of view and perspectives, is that rigor changing from, even had the conversation with a 5th grade teacher, well, rhetoric doesn't hit it, that doesn't impact us. And I'm like, well, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Because you have to build up. I know elementary or K2, they really focus on the foundations of literacy piece and all that. So just thinking where to start that would have the best, kind of go from there. If y'all have anything like that, any suggestions?
Tabitha, it reminds me of Sandra, this summer, if you're thinking specifically for middle level, we have a series this summer that focuses on just 3 of those 10 shifts. That's and it's point of view and perspective,
rhetoric,
author's purpose, and rhetoric. So that may be, you might want to make sure you register so you at least get the videos for that, because that might be a good place to start for middle school.
I think I registered for everything.
Well, I don't doubt it, Sandra.
Well, and thinking too, how do you want to attack it first? So if you know, like you said, foundations is a huge shift for K through 2. So that might be, you might have to maybe think about, okay, how can I do some grade band specific that have the biggest shifts that they need to be aware of out of the gate. And then you can go back in and start layering with some of that vertical stuff that you were talking about, as far as like 5th grade, like you said, 5th grade can't say, well, rhetoric doesn't apply to us, because yes, it may not say rhetoric in 5th grade, but the thinking that they have to do and the kinds of questions, yes, that's there, that's building up to where they're going. And so then you could kind of pour into that vertical piece more after they've gotten kind of their specific things that they can really kind of come out of the gate with the beginning of the year, knowing, like Brenda said, okay, these 3 things for middle school are big shifts, and I need to be prepared for those when the year starts.
And I know because we're kind of right there smack dab in the middle, of course, that's why it's middle school, but still, it's
Mhm.
that big transition that if got to be here, then it just gets progressively more rigorous.
Absolutely.
And something like that. And then but I think I've signed up for everything. And when I get stuff, I'm sharing it with teachers. So start with the grade band specifics of the top 10s for each one, kind of choose the biggest ones. And have y'all organized them that the biggest 3 are kind of at the beginning? In some regards, maybe, or just kind of look at
You
those
mean
again and kind of,
In the summer or?
in the top 10 document? Is that what you're asking about?
yes.
They're not in any particular order other than
Okay.
standards order. So we start with foundations and go through communications.
Okay.
But those 3 that we picked out for the summer, I
Mm-hmm.
think we would consider for middle school to be the
Mhm.
biggest.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also, and something to think about too is getting, teachers to understand that we tend to live where we're comfortable. So like even with plot, the plot diagram, we see that all levels, we see a plot
I
diagram.
know.
But we, if we're walking into the 8th grade and we're still just seeing a plot diagram, but there's not anything else beyond that,
Right.
then the question has to be, okay, are our kids, our students going to be ready to do anything about tracing and development? That's why that's so foreign of a concept to them, because they only live in the identification piece. So thinking about that kind of, when you're doing that work with them, helping teachers to understand that going back to a plot diagram should only be at a certain level for those that don't have it. The rest of it is we're moving them.
You need to go beyond that. Okay.
Yep. Same thing for point of view and perspective. Yes. Okay. We know what it is. You can identify it, but now we need to know why is that important?
Figurative language across the board in everything. You got to go beyond the surface level.
Absolutely.
Beyond the surface level. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank y'all so much. And
You're
I'll
welcome.
see you again
You're
later
welcome.
in the week or in the summer.
That's right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we're going to go ahead and let you guys go back and enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.